Welcome back to another episode of Open Source Cafe. Now, I'm super excited for this one. We have Brad here today with us. Brad, would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Hey, yeah, thanks. It's really fun to be here. My name is Brad Van Vliet. I'm one of the founders and sort of full-time developers behind Battlesnake. We're a pretty small team. There's only about 4 of us right now. But yeah.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for sharing, Brad. And we have been talking over email. Finally, really nice to see you in person.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what Battlesnake is?
Yeah.
Like for the viewers who are watching.
Yeah, definitely. So we like to think of Battlesnake as like gaming and esports for programmers. That's kind of the one line. And what's really interesting about it is there's a fantastic global community. It's something that started very locally in Canada. I'm Canadian, or I'm based out of Canada, like West Coast Canada. And most of our team is here. But over the last 2-ish years, Battlesnake's really kind of grown outside of Canada, and we've gotten exposed a lot in India, exposed a lot in Europe as well, and also into the States. And so, at its core, we think of it as like gaming and esports for developers, but really it's a global developer community. And that's kind of where we see the most valuable growth for sure.
Yeah, I could not agree more with the development part, because see, I've been taking part in the league as well, and most definitely I can agree that it is a really great way to get some hands-on experience with your algorithm skills or machine learning skills, if you will. But we'll talk more about that later. But a little bit more about you. Have you always been a gamer?
I think so.
Or is it more like the development side? Or tell us a little bit more about that.
So I've always been a programmer. I have a computer science degree. I've been a professional programmer for many years. I started programming in high school, which was really fun. And so very much like identify as a developer. I like programming. If I have an hour of free time, I'm going to spend it coding something. But also very much like I grew up playing video games. I still play video games. I've been playing a lot of Factorio lately, if you're familiar with that, or like Baldur's Gate 3 or stuff like that. It's fun. I also really like Twitch and live streaming and YouTube, even like YouTube live streaming. I think there's a lot of like Twitch as a concept, as a platform is really interesting, especially if you start to think about it outside of gaming. And so if you think about what live coding looks like and how it's evolving and how to make it engaging, how to make it interactive, how to make it entertaining the way that gaming can be. I really, really like kind of living at the intersection of all those things. And I've been a fan of all of that for many years.
Yeah. It's like the gaming part plus the development part. So people who are watching the live stream, I mean, most definitely there are so many developers who are into gaming, incling me.
Yeah.
I love video games. Yeah. So
what video games have you been playing? Have you been playing lately?
I'm more of a console person. So more like fast-paced shooters. Right, like Call of Duty and stuff. Not so much into RPGs. I like story games and multiplayer games. In RPGs, I do like The Witcher 3. That was a really beautiful game.
It's a classic.
There was the one Ghost of Tsushima. It was also very pretty. But yeah, that's pretty much about me. How about you? If you could pick a genre, that is your favorite.
If I could pick a genre of video game that's my favorite, oh geez.
Yeah.
So it changed. I have a couple young kids now. And before kids, I was very much like you, like console FPS, Call of Duty sort of thing. And then I just don't have the time to put into it, right? And so I like things that are a little bit more cerebral, like builders like Factorio, or even like City Skylines. That kind of thing is a lot like but I don't have the time to sit down and play real-time things.
With the timing part, to be honest, I sold all my consoles for the PlayStation 5. And now that the shortage of PS5s in the industry, whenever it comes in the stock, it sold out within 5 seconds. And it's been like 6 months, and I haven't been able to get my hands on one. So I don't have any console right now. I'm just utilizing my iPad to play some casual games. But anyway, thanks for sharing. So I really like that idea, people who are watching Twitch, right? Twitch is very popular. A lot of people, watch that, especially for gaming, right? So something that finds a balance between like gamers and developers who are interested in both these things. So yeah, totally agree with that point. Now
Yeah.
to talk a bit more about Battlesnake, right? Where did this idea come from? Like, what was the motivation behind it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Battlesnake originally started as an in-person sort of hackathon event that we started locally in our community. We started it up at the local university, actually, primarily engaging with computer science, computer engineering students. And the whole point of it was that, there's kind of two pieces to it. We didn't really like hackathon culture in general. I think hackathon culture is really fun for students, but it can be a lot harder for older and more experienced developers to get involved in a hackathon for time constraint reasons and also like limits of tech and that sort of thing. Oftentimes, more experienced programmers want to work on meatier ideas than just like 6 hours here or there. And so we wanted to do something where it was kind of like a hackathon, but everyone was working on the same problem, if that makes sense. Versus like typical hackathon is everyone goes off in groups and does their own thing, builds their own app, and then kind of presents it at the end. We wanted to be like, okay, if everyone's trying to solve the same problem, what does that look like? And we came up with the idea of a game of like, okay, what if you're coding against a game, and then we can see who plays the game best. The other sort of core motivation behind it was, how do we make something like a hackathon interesting for non-developers, non-programmers, people who aren't going to show up and program? How do we make it so that your parents, your colleagues, your friends, your kids, your grandparents are going to show up to this thing and be interested in what's happening? And that's kind of how we landed on the idea of we didn't get it right away, but we kind of landed on this idea of Snake. Because it has those two properties, right? You can spend some time programming against Snake, and it's really easy to get started because the game mechanics are very simple. But it's also very easy to watch. So it's really easy for someone who's not necessarily a programmer to watch a competitive game of Snake and understand who's winning and why and what their strategy might be versus another strategy. That was the core motivation, and it started very small. It started with I think the first one had about 30 folks, and then the next time we did it we jumped up to about 150, and it kind of grew from there. Now. Yeah, and that's global too, right? Like we've had in-person hackathon events where we've had 1,500 developers show up and spend 12 hours or so building Battlesnakes. And now we're just starting to like go global and virtual and Twitch primarily and this kind of thing.
Yeah. And when was this? Like you mentioned the first hackathon, right? It was like the university and whatever. When was that?
It was back in 2015. So we've been doing this for a while. And we started in 2015. It was me and some friends that I was working with at the time. And then about 2.5 years ago, we decided that there was enough interest from folks in our community. There was also enough interest from folks in other communities. So we had other school groups, other hackathon groups coming to us and saying, hey, this is really fun. We would like to do this in our community and offer this up to developers here. And that was when we decided to try to do this full time. So we made the jump from what we were doing and left our day jobs and started to try to build this community a lot larger than it currently was. Yeah.
And when you're speaking of like full time and like going all in, how did that idea execute? Like when was that?
When we decided.
And when did you realize that we gotta do this full time and there's like really big potential over here?
Yeah, it was really when we started to get pulled into other communities. So when we had other student groups, other engineering teams asking us, okay, this is really cool. How do we participate? When we were running, like we would run in-person events in West Coast Canada, we had people flying in from Europe to participate. We had people flying up from the States to participate. And that was really that was the trigger point for this of like, okay, people are really willing to put a lot of time and resources into being a part of this. How do we get this larger? How do we expand this community beyond just our immediate vicinity? And that was like, okay, now let's dive into this full time and see what happens.
Yeah, most definitely. I can't imagine how fun the in-person events would be like. You know, did you have like a big screen where you could see
we had
people?
like shoutcasters up on stage, and we were handing out like popcorn and everything to the spectators. Nice. Yeah, we'll get back to doing in person, and we'll definitely we'll fly you out for one, because I think it'd be really fun.
It would be fun. I was in like rank 34 this league. That was pretty fun. Yeah, that was fun. Cool. Alrighty, yeah, we'll talk more about Summer League later on. But can you maybe share about how different is Battlesnake right now than it was, let's say, in 2015? Like, what were the pivot points and what all things you have improved upon?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So there's kind of two things. Back in 2015, Battlesnake was very much a one-day. It was a one-day occurrence. So you started in the morning, and then we ran the tournament at the end of the day. And you most people spent the better part of like 6 to 8 hours of actually programming. But what happened is developers started working on their Battlesnakes between events. So some of the participants, some developers would show up with these very good, very advanced strategies and techniques that they'd be working on for months or sometimes years. And so we really had to sort of play with the format because we want to encourage both. We want to encourage developers that are doing really, really advanced top tier things and encourage them to push those boundaries and give them a place to compete at a very high level. But we also want to make it really fun for, newcomers or early career programmers. Yeah. And so that's where we landed on this sort of league format, which I think is working well. This is only the second time we've run this league format. But it has sort of this progression system, and you mentioned that you're up in platinum, which is really strong, and you're doing wonderful. But there's also room for newcomers and early career programmers to move from bronze to silver, and for us to celebrate that and celebrate as you move up through the gold tiers, and hopefully get you to come back for more leagues, right? Like if your first league you get up through silver and you're happy with that, and be like, okay, now I'm going to think about this. I'm going to think about other ideas that I have, and hopefully next league we can get you to come back and push through like gold and platinum.
So sort of like in hackathons we have best beginner hack. So sort of like that makes sense. It's also about like inclusivity, right? So when you mentioned it's about like students who are participating, and we'll talk more about that later, like what are students getting out of it. But once they see that, okay, so many amazing coders are taking part and making some, complex algorithms, am I really made for it? Well, if you're watching, most definitely yes. Even beginners can participate, and I'll leave the links in the description for like some of the live streams and things that can help you in getting started. But yeah, let's talk a bit more about the Summer League. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so the Summer League, it started, I think, right at the start of June. Was when the game started playing, and the leagues are unique. They're kind of a unique format for us, where you build the Battlesnake and you enter it into the league, and the league just constantly runs matchmaking. So we're using like esports style matchmaking under the hood, and so it's constantly generating games, and your Battlesnake is playing. I think it's every 10 minutes. Every 10 minutes, your Battlesnake will be in a new game, and then you'll gain or lose points based on your performance in that game, and then this will just keep going. And it's the second time we've kind of run with this idea with the rating and the progression, and we really like it. The community really likes it, and it kind of changes the development pattern a little bit, where it gives developers a lot more time to think about problems, if that makes sense. It's less of like, what can you do in a week or what can you do in a weekend. If you can have an idea, add it to your Battlesnake, walk away for a week, come back, see your movement in the leaderboard, and then you can also then there's this whole history of games that you can look at, and you can be like, okay, where am I losing now? How can I improve on this? Give me some ideas to develop this further, and then you can sit down for a couple days and implement that. And so it creates this longer development cycle, which I think is much more natural to what at least professional programming actually looks like. Like professional programming aren't, they're not churning out hacks in 24 hours. They're thinking about problems long term, and it's more about constant iteration.
Yeah, that's a good point you mentioned, because when you're like building the battle snake, at least for me, that is the approach that I followed. So initially, like when the snake was like, just some random moves and stuff, and
Yeah.
trying to optimize it a little bit, making sure like some edge cases are fixed, and then we iterate upon that and see where we are missing out, and towards like when competing with which snake we are, because we can always see the replay as well, right, of
Yep.
that particular snake match and whatever. But yeah, totally agree with that point. But and that's like the next question as well, which is such a big and huge community success. Obviously people love taking part in these competitions and everything. What do you think is like the most important, like the most popular reason that drives the attention of, let's say, students, or like you
Yeah.
mentioned yourself, that people who are like programmers, like not students, let's say working professionals as well,
Yeah.
might want to contribute? What might be the driving force for them to take part in Battlesnake competitions?
I think that's really interesting, and I think that's something that's very unique about our community. What we see as the primary driving force isn't necessarily the competition aspect of it. The competition aspect is fun, and we like to provide progression, and we like to, run tournaments and do shoutcasts and celebrate the winners. But really, the driving motivation is to like get out of academic programming and get into like practical programming, right? What does it look like? Because the way Battlesnake's set up, and you're familiar with this, you can run your Battlesnake using actual cloud services, using an actual web stack, and a lot of the problems that you get in developing a highly competitive Battlesnake, or a lot of the problems you're introduced to, are actual professional web development problems. So you have to start thinking about concurrency. You have to start thinking about latency. You have to start thinking about data structures and algorithm runtimes and optimizations, right? Battlesnake as a problem is not one that's solvable, right? It's more about, what are the strategies that make sense to me? How do I manipulate the board in a way that is statistically more advantageous to me later on? And those are like really interesting, really meaty computer science problems. And that's really the driving motivation, right? It's like, it's giving programmers a way to kind of get out of an academic setting and flex those muscles a bit.
Yeah, I agree with your point regarding the practical implementation of what people are learning. I often get the questions, and you might have heard it as well, like, what is the use of lead code? Why are we solving these data structures and algorithms questions? Where am I going to apply this in the real life? When you do get a job role and something like that, you will realize how important these complexities and things are. And Battlesnake can definitely help you in thinking critically, like, okay, so for example, so many pathfinding algorithms in graph exist, right? So if you want to learn about how to practically implement those, Battlesnake is the way to go. You can try out your hands-on, your pathfinding algorithm. You can try out A star. If you're into machine learning, you can see reinforcement learning or whatever. But yeah, I totally agree with that point. And yeah, contributing to Battlesnake, I have also realized where my weaknesses are, where my strengths are. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
I think like part of our goal is to give developers something to talk about in interviews, something to show off that they can be proud of. Like, here's a project that isn't like a to-do list app or a leak code puzzle that I've solved, but here's something that I built from scratch, and here are my goals that I set out to. And everyone's goals are different. Like, your goals might be to learn min-max binary search or binary tree search, but someone else's goals might be to deploy something on AWS Lambda, or to get into ML, or to get into AI research. And we provide a really good venue for you to do any of those things, and then also be able to talk about them later, right? Because it's so accessible. You can talk to an interviewer or talk to an employer and say, well, yeah, I was playing the Snake game, and I had this really interesting situation that I had to solve, and my latency was going through the roof, and here's how I thought about it, right? That's a really fun side effect of what we're doing. It's just giving people actual development experience that they can build upon, and then also just be really proud of.
Yeah, and from my experience of giving interviews, that is exactly the thing that they focus on in general as well. So like, they give you a solution and they ask, hey, what is the time complexity of this? Can you maybe make it more optimized? The big O notation and stuff. So yeah, I totally agree with that. So speaking of like getting started, can you maybe also share about, like, there are so many resources to get started, and like you mentioned, it's inclusive, so beginners can get started with it as well. So let's talk a bit more about the starter projects.
Yeah. So the starter projects kind of they started from the community, actually. So a lot of the community members started to build kind of boilerplate GitHub templates for different languages, for different cloud providers. And one of the things that we, as sort of the developers behind the game, we want to get you programming the snake logic quickly, obviously, because I think that's the really fun part. And obviously expanding to like, okay, how am I deploying this? How am I hosting this? What does CI look like? What does CD look like as part of the more advanced problem space? But we want to get that out of the way as quickly as possible. So the community started to open source these, they just called them starter snakes. Like, hey, do you want to use Rust? Here's a really good starting point. Do you want to use Python? Here's a really good starting point. And all we did is we kind of adopted, I think we currently support 5 of them. We kind of adopted 5 of them as like official ones that we maintain. They're no better or worse than the other ones that are out there. They're just ones that we maintain versus having the community maintain. And so there's some official, if you just go to, I think, like docs.battlesnake.com, there'll be a link there for the starter projects, and you'll see all the ones that are listed. What's really interesting about the starter projects is once we started doing that, cloud providers and cloud services companies started to provide their own starting code as well. So if you want it, like, I'll use AWS and SageMaker as an example. SageMaker is AWS's reinforcement learning tool or learning service. The AWS team saw that we were doing this, and they're like, "Oh, like we should definitely have a SageMaker starter snake if you want to get started." And it's not smart enough to win games, but it's enough to get you pointed in the right direction, right?
Yeah, because the most of the time should definitely be focused on the actual implementation and the brainstorming part and all the nitty-gritty things. You're providing that, like, okay, here's a template, use it and modify it according to your own needs. That makes sense. Cool. So according to you, like from your point of view, as a person who is running Battlesnake, like you have a team and everything, what is the most interesting part about your role?
About the community or about my role in the community?
About your role in the community, like what do you look up to the most, when you wake up and you're like, okay, another Battlesnake day, and here's what this is what I do it for, is the question that I'm asking.
Yeah, so my number one goal is always community and collaboration. And I think if you want to talk about interesting things, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but it's worth restating. There is a competitive aspect to this, and we celebrate winners, we celebrate top tier play, we run tournaments, but we also want to celebrate success at all levels. So we really want to celebrate your first Battlesnake, or your first win, or the first time that you managed to stay on the board for 100 turns. And so we really want to celebrate all levels, and to do that well, it requires a lot of collaboration. So I think what's interesting is that while the game itself is very highly competitive, the community is very collaborative that's behind it. And everyone is sharing ideas. There's a lot of code sharing. There's a lot of helping. There's a lot of mentoring that goes on. Even, yourself involved, right? Like some of the stuff that you were doing live, you weren't trying to hide your code from people and be like, well, this is mine. This is how I'm going to win. That's not really the spirit of it. And so I'm always constantly humbled and impressed by what the community puts out and gets behind it. Some of the tools they made, some of the mentor-mentee relationships that we've seen form, and that's the part that gets me the most excited about what we're doing. Right? It's not the competitive gaming side of it is fun, and that's kind of an interesting problem space. But really, the magic of this is happening on Discord or in Twitch chat during live channels or offline, when individuals are working together to kind of solve problems and kind of lift each other up through those strategies.
Yeah. Speaking of Discord, make sure you check out the link in the description. I'll leave the link to the Battlesnake Discord. You can join that, meet the community. Yeah. And I really love the point you mentioned. Like you mentioned it previously as well. It's even though it's has a competitive spirit, it's also more about the learning aspect of it. And I believe that the learning aspect cannot exist if there's no community aspect. So in such competitions and even at hackathons, if everyone is learning on their own, that is not going to be as efficient as learning together in a group. So yeah, that makes sense. Thanks a lot for sharing,
Yeah.
Brad. And just one last question: what is next for Battlesnake?
So we've got the summer league is underway now. It wraps up shortly, and then the fall league will be starting. I don't want to announce a date, but I'm going to say soon. Fall league will be starting up, and then we're really excited to get back to in-person events. So Battlesnake started in person. We think that everything that we're doing online with the leagues is going to stick around. We really enjoy doing that. We want to do more of that, but we also miss in-person live tournaments, and we're trying to think of ways to not only host bigger, better ones ourselves, but also let other people host them in their communities. So how do we enable, community builders and developer community leaders to run Battlesnake competitions locally? And so that's definitely where our head is at as we kind of move into 2022.
Yeah, it's actually what I had in my mind as well. Like you're mentioning in-person events, now we can talk about like localized meetups and competitions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a really great idea. Yeah, good luck with that, and really looking forward to it. Cool.
Yeah, awesome.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for joining, Brad. That was, those are all the questions I had. Really appreciate you joining, and for all, all the people who are watching this, make sure you check out the links in the description. Anyone can get started. All the resources and everything I'll be providing in the description, and yeah, make sure you check out the summer league and the fall league, like Brad mentioned.
Yeah.
And hopefully you learn, contribute, and help others. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for having me.